Welcome back for the second part of One Man's Faith. We're continuing kind of our survey through the Old Testament, and we're looking for the second week at the book of Numbers. Now, we just talked about the sections of the book of Numbers and where the term comes from. Numbers, in a way, can be thought of as like an in-between two baptisms. There was a baptism of the Red Sea as they walked through the Red Sea. But at the end of the 40-year period in Numbers and Deuteronomy, they walked through the Jordan. And so, in a sense, it can depict a time of struggle that the Israelites had and that sometimes we have, because when you go from Egypt into the wilderness, you're going from the world into a time of change within yourself. And we kind of see this in the Israelites as they go from being slaves. Listen, they were slaves for 400 years. When they leave Egypt, that's at the end. The Bible tells us that on the same day that they came into Egypt, 430 years later they left. So everybody that was alive at the Exodus had been a slave all their life. Aaron was 123 years old when he dies, 2 years after the Exodus. So nobody had lived 400 years. Nobody knew the freedom they had when they came into Egypt. And being in Egypt, they were inundated with the Egyptian ways, even though they lived separate. I think the Egyptians kind of lost their fear or disdain for the Israelites because they had to work with them because they used them as slave labor. They did other things for them too. They kept their houses. You know, it wasn't just working and building, what are those things? Oh man, well, you know what they are. The Egyptian pyramids. That's, whoa. You know, they did more than that. Matter of fact, they actually built 2 cities. So they were more integrated, even though they were still separate. They never became assimilated into the Egyptian culture, which is interesting because that's exactly what happens when they leave. At least the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, when they were taken into exile at the end of the next 400 or 500 year period, when Assyria came in and dispersed the 10 tribes, but those 2 tribes, which were the kingdom of Judah, actually stayed together, went into Babylon, but came back out 70 years later. And they never lost their identity. They're about, if I remember correctly, they're the only nation that has ever been dispersed, assimilated into other nations, and still kept their separate identity. Now we try to do, there are nations and sections of people that try to do that in America, you know, like we have in Las Vegas. We have a China, kind of a Chinatown or Koreatown. And a lot of those people don't speak much English. And they try to keep their culture. They're kind of doing what the Israelites did. Because Babylon didn't cause them to lose their identity. So they're coming out of the world, they're baptized into the sea, and then they come into the wilderness, i.e. they come into being ruled by God. God is establishing himself. He's establishing who he is to them and who they are to him. It's a learning period where they come out of the worldly thoughts and learning to let God guide them, protect them, provide for them, which is what we go through when we come out of the world. We've got to change the way we think. We can no longer think the way we used to. And this is kind of what Israel is going through. They come to the mountain after 3 days' journey. They come to the mountain. They experience God. God talks to them. He speaks to them. He actually speaks the 10 Commandments to them. They didn't like that. And so they said, Moses, you speak to us, let God speak to you. But they experience God. He gives them the way to live document, i.e. the covenant. He makes covenant with them. He tells them, okay, this is what I want you to do. And they willingly say, whatever you want, God, we will do. He even writes it himself in stone. We use that term sometimes. Okay, it's settled. It's settled because it's settled in stone. Well, that kind of comes from this. God made a covenant, and he wrote the 10 Commandments, which are if I could say, the preamble to the whole covenant. He wrote that in stone. God himself, it said God wrote with his finger the commandments that he gave. He not only did that once, he did that twice. Because when Moses came down from the mountain, matter of fact, God said, hey, you better get down there. Your people are really screwing up. And so when Moses goes down, he's so mad he breaks the stones. He throws them down and they break. Then he has to go back up again. And this time he has to take his own stone, but God wrote on those stones again the second time. God said, hey, I want to live with you guys. Build me a house. And so he downloaded, and this is what he did when Moses was there the first time. He downloaded into Moses what he wanted done, how he wanted it done, the size of it, the altar, the sacrificial altar, the bronze basin of water. We don't know how big it was. Some believe it was 100 gallons, some 300 gallons, but it was a rather large pool of water. And for the most part, they weren't required to jump in it, but to wash their hands and feet. But it was a large altar, so a large laver, a large bathtub, so to speak. So to go into the holy place and the Holy of Holies, you had to go through the sacrificial process and the cleansing process. And this was all given to Moses. Then he was given the size of the tabernacle. The actual tabernacle itself was 45 feet long, 15 feet wide. The first section, called the Holy Place, was 30 feet long, and the Holy of Holies was 15 by 15. So the Holy Place was 30 by 15, and it had the menorah, it had the altar of incense, and it had the table of showbread. In the Holy of Holies sat the Ark of the Covenant by itself. So God said, listen, set this all up for me, because I am going to live with you. I am going to go with you. I am going to travel with you. I'm going to lead you with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. God protected them. As long as the cloud and the fire were stationary, they were to be stationary. When they saw the cloud lift, they were to lift. They were to get up, pack everything, get in order that was given by God, and march and follow the cloud wherever it led them. For the most part, it stayed at Mount Sinai for 2 years. And because they had to build the tabernacle and get that all ready. And then it lifted and took them over to close to the edge of the Jordan River, because they were supposed to cross over. Then that would have been about 2.5, maybe 3 years after they left Egypt. But they failed. But God says, when I move, you move. He says, I will protect you from the heat and the cold. God takes them in the direction where nobody's traveling, so that he can teach them and they not be interfered with by other travelers going through. The main road was up north, kind of along the Mediterranean Sea. Well, God took them down and around the Sinai Peninsula, and it wasn't a place of travel. It was kind of hard because because of the mountains there. So God took them in a place where they could learn of him, learn of his ways, and not really be interfered with by other people. They weren't bothered by the ways of the world till after they had seen what was promised in the land. In other words, they wandered in the wilderness, away from the other places. They came over by the Jordan, and they were to go into the promised land, but they failed. And when they failed, then they started wandering, and they wandered through the land of the Amorites and the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Edomites. So they came into more contact with some of the other nations. They were even attacked by some of the other nations after they failed to go across into the land that God had given them. Now, they would have been battling then. But God was with them. God said, listen, if you'll follow me, you won't have any problems. He even provides for them food, water, their clothing did not wear out. Now, I know some of you ladies may not like to wear the same piece of cloth for 40 years, but hey, when you're trapped out in the wilderness, anything will do. Harper's Bazaar and Macy's and Neiman Marcus, Neiman Marcus, is that right? Sears, all those places, there were no shopping malls. There were no places for them to buy clothes. They would have had to have made their own, but their clothes, their shoes, nothing wore out for 40 years. And God provided food and water all that time for them. That's how great he is. All right, and hey, let's think about that for a minute. Go ahead and get another cup of coffee, and I'll be right back.